I've already covered a tremendous amount of detail in David's life. Again, let me just mention 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 6 through 11 says that all of the things that were written in the Old Testament were written for our learning, so that we through them might learn not to blaspheme, not to lust, not to do these things. And David's life is just a tremendous example of what to do. There are some things he did that were as good as any character in the entire Bible, but David also fell as far as any person in the Bible when he committed adultery with Bathsheba and then even murdered her husband trying to cover up his sin. And so there's a lot to learn from David, and if we don't learn it at his expense, we have to learn it through our own mistakes. This is the reason that the Scripture is so graphic and so it presents both sides of the story. It doesn't whitewash anything. It shows you this character, David, who is after God's own heart, and yet he's sinned greatly. And there's things that we can learn through him to keep us from going through those same things. So in the previous chapter, I was dealing with 1 Samuel chapter 24, where David was in a cave and Saul came in. Saul was trying to kill him. He had 3,000 men that he had marshaled, and David and his men were hiding in the recesses of this cave. Saul came in to cover his feet, and David's men said, "This is the day that you can kill him." And instead, he just cut off a little portion of his robe. And then after Saul left the cave, David walked out after him, fell on his face, and said, "Look, I've cut off a part of your robe. This will show you that I am not trying to kill you, because I could have done it. That's what the people that were with me told me to do." And instead of David defending himself and taking vengeance out on the man who was trying to kill him and the man who had done so much damage to him, instead he just committed this to the Lord. And because of it, Saul, the king who had been trying to kill David, he actually began to bless him. And he said, "Now I know that you will be king and that you will succeed." This is awesome when you get your enemies actually blessing you and saying this godly things about you. And yet it wouldn't have happened if he would have taken matters into his own hand. And I quoted this verse a number of times yesterday, but Romans chapter 12, verse 19 says, "Vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord, I will repay." And one of the lessons to learn from David is that David did not defend himself. David committed his judgment and the thing to be done right to him to the Lord. And because of it, not only did he eventually become king, but when he messed up, instead of reaping judgment, he received mercy because he had shown mercy. The Scripture says that God will show judgment without mercy on those who have shown no mercy. You know, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll just say this quickly, and because it fits this point that we're making right here. But when you get over into where David sinned with Bathsheba in the 11th chapter of 2 Samuel, then in the 12th chapter, Nathan the prophet came and exposed David's sin, and he gave him a parable. And in this parable, he said there was this rich man that had multitudes of cattle, lambs, sheep, all these things. But when he had somebody come and he wanted to fix a meal for him, he didn't take one of his own animals and kill it to feed the guest. He went to his neighbor who only had one little ewe lamb, and it was an orphan. He had raised it as his own daughter. It was dear unto him. And this rich man, instead of taking from his flock, he went to this one man, stole the only thing that he had, killed it to feed his neighbor. And they gave this parable to David. And when David heard it, he got so mad. He said, "This man will have to restore 4 times as much as what he took from this man. Plus, you need to kill him. He will die for this." And then Nathan turned around and said, "You are the man." And I really believe that in a sense what God did was let David choose his own judgment. He gave him this parable about a man who did something terrible to his neighbor, and it was actually about David. And if David would have said, "Well, this man is wrong, he will have to restore the lamb, but let's extend some mercy to him," did you know, I believe that that's what he would have gotten. But because he had judgment without mercy, you reap what you sow. And David actually wound up having his son that was born to Bathsheba die because of it. He established his own judgment. That same thing happened in the 24th chapter of 1 Samuel, where he gave mercy to Saul. And because he did that, he reaped mercy in his old age. Even when his own son came out against him and caused a civil war, he got mercy instead of judgment. I tell you, this applies to us today. If you are harsh with other people, and maybe they deserve it, but did you know what? Sooner or later, you're going to do something wrong, and you will deserve harsh judgment. But if you've been harsh on other people, you're going to reap what you sow. If you are merciful to other people, people will be merciful to you. Anyway, that's a summary of what I already taught, but that's a great application. In the 25th chapter of 1 Samuel, it says in verse 1, "And Samuel died, and all of the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran." But you know, this is kind of sad because Samuel, up until this time, this is the 25th chapter in 1 Samuel, and those 25 chapters were basically all around Samuel. Samuel was the prophet who had delivered Israel from the Philistines, and he had done so many things. He anointed Saul to be king. He anointed David to be king. But when he died, it just says that the people mourned for him. But he was kind of out of leadership at this time because Saul had turned away from the Lord and had turned away from Samuel. And it's kind of sad to see that Samuel just died and there wasn't any more mentioned about it than this. So David, after Samuel died, he went down into a city in Paran, in the wilderness there. And there was a man there whose name was Nabal. And the word Nabal means dolt. And the word dolt, according to the dictionary, means a stupid person. And so this was an evil man. And David, during this time that he and his men, he had 600 men with him at this time, they kept all of Nabal's flocks and sheep and everything. And apparently during this time, rustling and people coming in and stealing some of the herd and stuff was a common thing. But David and his men protected everything that Nabal had. And he didn't lose a single thing. And then it was heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. And this is when they had a feast, and they would kill the animals and they would dole it out to people as gifts. And so David sent some of his men, some of his young men out to Nabal and just asked, could you help us? Because he had 600 men he had to feed. He had been kind to Nabal and all of his shepherds that were herding the flocks. And he went and asked, could you, give us something to eat? And look at Nabal's response. In verse 10 it says, and Nabal, this is 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 10, and Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shears and give it unto men whom I know not from whence they be? Did you know if he had just said no, he might have got a different response. But instead of just saying no, he actually just slammed David, insulted him. And I tell you, this was not a smart thing to do. And so when David's men returned to him, it says in verse 13, and David said unto his men, gird ye on every man his sword, and gird ye on every man. And they girt on every man his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. But one of the servants of this man Nabal went and told Abigail, this was Nabal's wife, told Abigail what he had done. And he also verified that David and his men had been protection unto them. They didn't miss a thing and that they had treated them well. And this servant told Abigail, says, man, you better watch what you do because there is danger. David will respond to the way that Nabal had criticized him. And so Abigail, the wife of Nabal, she took all of this food and all of these things and she brought them to David. She sent them ahead of her. And then when she came and saw David, she fell on her face and began to plead for his mercy towards them. And let me just read this to you. It says in verse 23, "And when Abigail saw David, she hastened and lighted off the ass and fell before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground and fell at his feet and said, Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thy handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience and hear the words of thine handmaid." You know, there's again a lot of things that you can learn. I'm going through this very quickly. But Nabal had rebelled against David. And you could make a comparison that this is similar to us, how we've sinned against God and we have not treated Him the way that He's treated us. He's been merciful and gracious to us, and yet we are treating Him like trash. And so in the same way that because of that there is judgment determined by God, then Abigail would be symbolic of Jesus, how he pled for mercy instead of judgment and says, "Upon me be your wrath." Abigail, in a sense, was acting like an intercessor like Jesus did and saying, "Let all of your judgment come upon me, but be merciful and don't come and kill all of the people in Nabal's house." There's also another thing you can see here, that in the previous chapter, David had been very gracious towards Saul, who was trying to kill him. In comparison, Nabal, he certainly treated David incorrectly. It was wrong what he did, but it wasn't as severe as what Saul was trying to do to David. And yet David gave total mercy and grace unto Saul, and yet here he was going to give judgment unto Nabal. And I think one of the things you can learn from this is that we are inconsistent lots of times in the way we do things. David had already predetermined, because he had had to deal with this problem with Saul for years, that he was not going to be the one to kill Saul and remove him so that David could become king. So he had dealt with that. But in this situation, he hadn't dealt with this. This was a surprise to him. He hadn't set his heart. If you listen to my program yesterday out of Psalms chapter 57, verse 7, I made an issue of that David had already set his heart and had predetermined that he would not be the one to bring judgment upon Saul. But he hadn't done that with Nabal.
Andrew will be right back after these messages.
You were created with a purpose, written in the heart of God. Long before you were born, He is calling you to find it. We want to help you experience His unconditional love, to be equipped and empowered to become a world changer.
And now, here's Andrew.
He should have. I think that this was a mistake on David's part. And as a matter of fact, David even turned around and blessed Abigail for turning him from his wrath and said, "This would have been wrong for me to do it." So David here was being inconsistent, but Abigail, similar to the way that Jesus bore all of our judgment from the Father and kept us from being judged, Abigail did that for her husband and for all of the people in the house. And so he spoke unto her, and in verse 25, this is Abigail still speaking, and said, "Let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him." And the word Nabal means dolt, and it's a stupid person. I already shared that. And basically, this is his wife saying that he is a dolt. He is a foolish man, and she just pled for mercy. Now, you need to point this out, that in those days, people didn't marry because they loved each other and because they, desired to be married to each other. Lots of times these marriages were prearranged, and apparently Abigail was just given to this man Nabal, and he was an evil man, and even his wife Abigail knew that he was an evil man, and she had no respect for him. He had probably treated her terrible. And you can see here that by the things that she was saying, that there was no love lost between her and Nabal. And in verse 26 it says, "Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil to my Lord be as Nabal, And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, talking about all of the food, the wine, the bread, and all of the things that she had prepared for him, let it even be given unto the young man that follow my Lord. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, and evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. In verse 29 it says, yet a man is risen to pursue thee. This is talking to David about Saul the king pursuing him, and to seek thy soul. But the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the souls of thine enemies, them shall he sling out as at the midst of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel. This is speaking of David becoming king. This shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. So what Abigail is doing is saying that if you avenge yourself, and if you kill Nabal and all of the people in his house, which David had sworn that he would do, he would kill every single male in Nabal's house. She said, there is a difference between killing people because they've done something wrong to you and because you're upset, and then killing people in war. David had killed many people in battle. Matter of fact, later Abner is going to be slain by Joab, David's general, and David got mad at him for killing the king, the Ishbosheth, the king of the northern tribes, killing their general in a time of peace. And David made a distinction between killing someone out of just carnal flesh and stuff and doing it in a time of war. Man, I could spend the rest of today's broadcast easily talking about this, but there's a difference between fighting a war and killing people in battle and killing people just as murder because you're mad at them because they did something to you. And so Abigail is making that point and telling him, you will grieve over this when you become king if you've done this just in the flesh. And so David, when he heard these things, man, he blessed Abigail. In verse 32, he said, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which has sent thee this day to meet me, and blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. Again, if you watched yesterday's program, I made the point that he didn't avenge himself when it came to Saul because he had already predetermined this, but when it came to Nabal, he was going to avenge himself, which was inconsistent with the way he had lived before. And he is blessing Abigail for coming and sparing him from doing this thing. And so anyway, just for time's sake, let me go through and just tell you what happened. David went ahead and accepted the food that Abigail had brought and refused to go kill Nabal and all of the men in his house. And so he returned unto his place. And Abigail, she went back home. And when she got home, Nabal was feasting, and it says he had made a feast like a king. He was a very prosperous man, and he was just reveling in all of his prosperity and how much flocks he had and everything. And he was just totally into himself, and he was throwing a feast, and he was totally drunk. And so she didn't say anything to him that night when she first came back home. But in the morning, it says when the wine had gone out of him, then she told him that David and 400 of his men were coming to kill him and every male in his household, and Abigail had turned them away from their wrath. But when she told Nabal what had happened, let me just read a little bit of this. It says, in verse 37, it says, but it came to pass in the morning when the wine was gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. Here's the way that the New Living Translation translates this verse. It says, in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him what had happened. As a result, he had a stroke, and he lay paralyzed on his bed like a stone. And then in the next verse it says that 10 days later, for 10 days, he had just, I don't know if it was a stroke or something, but he had been basically paralyzed by it. He was just laying in bed. And 10 days later, the Lord smote Nabal that he died. And so it was told David what had happened to Nabal, and he sent for Abigail and asked Abigail to be his wife. Now again, this may sound really strange to some of us that, right when a man dies, you're going to immediately go to his wife and ask her if she will come and marry you. But in those days, marriages was arranged, and you can tell by her previous statements that she had no love for Nabal. He was an evil man, and probably it was a terrible situation. Here's another thing you can learn from this, that this woman, even though she didn't have the rights that women have today, and she was given like property to a man, she was a faithful person. She kept her faith in the Lord. A lot of women in a situation like that would just give up and say, who cares what happens to me? But you can see that Abigail still had character. She was still trusting the Lord, and the things that she said to David showed a lot of wisdom on her part. And because she did not deny her faith because of the negative situation she was in, and because she kept trusting in the Lord, then when Nabal died, she became the wife of David, eventually the queen of Israel, and God promoted her and blessed her. And again, this I don't think is improper at all because of the way things were done in those days. She had no love for Nabal, and she went and married David and became his wife, and she actually bore him children. And so anyway, this is a great example of a godly woman. Let me also go down to this 43rd verse. It says, David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were both also of them his wives, talking about Abigail and Ahinoam. But in verse 44 it says, but Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to 𝗞𝗿𝘆, the son of Laish, which was of Gallim. And you know what? David had married Michal, and it says that Michal loved David. It didn't say that David loved Michal, but it says that Michal loved David. At one time, they had a good relationship, but David had to flee for his wife, and her father, Saul, actually took her and gave her to another man just to hurt David. He didn't care about his daughter. He was just out to hurt David. This reveals a lot about what was in Saul's heart. And man, I'm out of time today, but there's some great lessons here to learn. And again, this is what we need to do, is take these things and learn them at David's expense and not at our own expense. I've got this book entitled Lessons from David. I'm giving this to you as a gift. We encourage you to give, but we want you to have it so much that if you could not or would not send anything, I'll give it to you. I've also got other things. So listen to our announcer as he gives you all of this information, and call or write today.